KNSJ is proud to present the Electric Picnic, a show about poetry and prose, hosted by Sue Taylor, San Diego poet, short story writer, and educator.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Electric Picnic. We have a panel of 4 poets gathered by a previous guest, Howard Gershkowitz, who will also be reading. We have Fournier, Roxanne Doty, and Frank Iosue, and they are hailing from Minnesota and from Arizona. So welcome everybody. I'm just going to go alphabetical by last names. So Roxanne, your last name starts with a D, so that puts you first today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel.
You're welcome. You mentioned earlier that you live in Phoenix, but you're keeping cool staying at your sister's house in Minnesota in St. Paul.
Correct.
Have you been writing any poetry since you've been at her house?
Yes, I've not finished anything. I mean, I have some drafts. I kind of scribble every morning, and that's always the beginning of my process. Sometimes it takes a while for it to become anything.
I think it would be harder when you're visiting people to set aside that time.
It is. Fortunately, I stay in the attic, which is, a finished attic, and so it's kind of my little space, and I usually have my tea there for a couple of hours in the morning, and when words don't come to me, I read some inspiring words, and I have a habit of copying lines either from a poem or just a narrative that I like, and sometimes that inspires me.
So when you travel, do you take books of poetry with you?
Not always. I actually, I usually read poetry and fiction, but I'm just on a kick now with some nonfiction books. But so I don't, it's funny. Sometimes other poems are not what inspire my poetry. Sometimes it might be a short story or a novel or just good writing. I don't have any poems with me, but I've actually printed out several recently that I like. Yeah.
That sounds nice. Emily Dickinson comes to mind from her second story room, looking out at the world. So
yeah.
Maybe you've got a little view of that glimpse from the attic. And do you write in other genres besides poetry?
Yeah, I published a novel in 2022, and I've written quite a few short stories. I've started and stopped of putting a collection of short stories together, and that's something I want to carry through this coming year.
Do you prefer one over the others?
I can't say I do. I mean, I have to say I started out with short stories mostly, and I do love that genre. But I mean, sometimes it's just what's coming to me at the time, and for the past year, really, it's been mainly poems. So I have a bunch of short stories I've started, but it's poems and I figured, just go with what's coming to you now.
Yeah, thank you for that response. It sounds very organic.
I mean, if you can't do something organic and try to force yourself to do something that's not coming, for me it doesn't work. So.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote academic. I was in academics, and I wrote academic stuff for many, many years. And I loved writing, but academics almost killed my love of writing. And so now, I have to love what I'm writing.
Very good. Well, we'd love to hear some poetry.
Oh, okay. Well, I have some. Do you want me to just start out with one? Or?
Start out with one, and then we can talk about that.
The one I'm going to start out with, it was published this March, and I chose it because I've gotten a lot of feedback, and I got some really nice feedback from my former writing teacher, which always means a lot to me. It's called Standing on the Long Island Expressway Overpass in Queens, New York. Headlights and taillights below glitter off wet asphalt like small sparks of truth. I can almost see the old Chevy, the drift of smoke, stain on windows, taste the tobacco, smell the beer on your breath. The tip of my cigarette glows hot orange, as if I could write with its burn. On this night air dense with mist and memory, journeys through myself, the deserts and cities, dim streets and midnight bars, all the drowning stars, and sunrises to arrive at this long moment of smoldering time, at once soft and violent.
Wow, you really put us there. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to say anything about what.
Yeah, why don't you? So you start out where you're standing on the bridge, but then I feel like there's this connection with a specific car.
Yeah, and I grew up on Long Island, and we had relatives in Manhattan, and so we would always drive into Manhattan to visit them. And I went back there several years ago, and this was a bridge going over to a park, and going back to the parking lot, it was dark, and it had been raining, so it's kind of misty, and the Long Island Expressway was kind of shimmery, and there was a lot of traffic still. And I just looked out over that because it was so familiar to being in a car with my dad when I was a kid. And I'm looking and I'm thinking like, oh my God, I can see the car. I can see him in this traffic. And it was such an incredibly strong feeling that, I mean, I'm always fascinated by time. And sometimes you just feel like you could just reach out and just almost grab that time back, but you can't quite do it. And so I had this very strong feeling, as I was gazing out over the expressway, and that's what prompted this.
And those two perspectives, it really makes a beautiful poem. I like that very much.
Thank you.
So then you covered that country and you ended up out in Phoenix. So you've been around a bit.
Yeah, we traveled a lot when I was a kid, and so I guess that sort of rubbed off on me.
But, did you start writing at an early age?
I think I can remember writing things in school, but I really didn't start writing. I used to keep journals and stuff, but nothing really. I'd write what I thought would be song lyrics. I took guitar lessons, and I thought, I'm going to write a song, and they really were poems, And I actually sometimes am inspired by song lyrics that I think are very poetic.
I'm relating so much to what you're saying. This is really a pleasant conversation.
Oh, great. Well,
please read something else.
Okay, I do write about the desert. This is from a book, a poetry collection I just came out, I think April or May. This is called Hours of the Desert. When the desert, when far from cities but close, when ironwood forest and organ pipe and devil's highway, when a trail becomes a plea because the distance is long, when as close to God as you'll ever get, when still an illusion, when layover spots because dreams, when abandoned backpacks and love letters, books of poetry, books of prayer, empty water bottles, when shade is a black plastic bag over creosote and cactus, when the sun, when days are fire, when snakes take cover, when a bracelet on the ground, when someone wore it, because flesh and blood, because someone wrote the love letters, held the books of poetry and prayer, because a heartbeat, when still the heat, when nothing but the heat, when the future lies beyond mountains, when it disappears, when a mirage of water, when a man with no features, when he hides in a uniform, behind a weapon, inside the law, when on your knees, when grace, when compassion, when kindness, when humanity, when lost, when you walk again, when the dream and the prayer and the grace and the snake and the man cross the same desert, all unaware of each other, when over and over again, when clusters of black dots mark places of death because the bones, when white crosses, when no identificado, when bodies don't get counted, when they do, when counting doesn't matter, when justice is a moment of madness, when it dies.
Oh, your technique that's just thrilling. I mean, I've heard shorter poems, the repetition of the first word, and then how you come back and connect it all with the becauses. And That is really mesmerizing. Thank you very much. What is the title of that poem?
Hours of the Desert.
Hours of the Desert.
And, I started writing. I used to volunteer with a humanitarian group that went out into the desert and put water for crossers. And it really is about that. But sometimes when I read it, like, the man with no features and the dream and the prayer and the snake and grace and all unaware of each other but in the same place, I kind of like to think that opens up to broader, to more than just the desert. We're all in this thing together called life, and we're often so unaware of each other, even though we're so very close. So I don't know if that came across, and I actually wasn't even thinking about that when I wrote it. But
it's such a good lesson for beginning writers, the power of observation and then going beyond.
Yeah, and I'm inspired by a lot of stuff I just see. I think all poets are really, but I think observing is important for any genre of writing, just observing what you encounter.
And you mentioned that's part of a collection that just came out?
Yeah, and the collection is also called Hours of the Desert, and it has lovely words by Al on the back.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll hear from Al. He also endorses poets. Very good. Well, best of luck with that. That's a lovely, lovely way to start the show.
Thank you.
And now, Al, your last name starts with an F. Fournier, I'm seeing. I'm wondering why you're not pronouncing it the French way, Fournier.
There's a story behind that, I suppose. So my dad was raised in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and there was it was a very interesting environment with people from different enclaves from different parts of Europe. And I think it just became Fournier instead of Fournier. Maybe Fournier sounded too fancy for Marinette's Michigan.
Okay, so you everymanned it. Tell us a little bit about your writing process, Al.
I'm a morning writer. I wake up every morning and I write. I never know what I'm going to write. Occasionally I'll have a project or a little bit of a plan, but mostly it's spontaneous. So some days I'll write a poem, other days I'll be journaling. I do also write some nonfiction pieces from time to time. And for me, it's kind of an intuitive process. I just kind of try to open up to it. A little bit about like what Roxanne was saying about not forcing things. I'm in that camp as well. You can't, it doesn't work as well for me to set out to say, well, I'm going to write a poem about this or that. But often, the words start to come and I follow where they lead. That's typically my approach, especially for poetry.
And do you look forward to that writing time?
I look forward to it. I can't imagine my life without it, to be honest with you. And I started doing it probably back around 2018. I made a space. Even before that, I made a space in our other house where I could go and waking up before my wife and my daughter so that I would just have quiet time. And now I really rely on it. Mm-hmm. It almost doesn't matter what's going on with work. I do have that commitment. And no, it never feels like a chore, that part of it, that part of the day. I think at first it took a little doing to create the discipline in me. There were mornings early on where it's like, oh, do I really want to get up? But no, I value it too much now to let go of it.
I had that feeling, and I tried to think of a word for it. The best I could come up with was instinct.
Yeah, but I feel like it keeps me sane almost.
Yeah, very good.
And it's what I get. It's my time for myself, no matter what else is going on in my life.
Well, you mentioned work. Are you your own boss?
I am to some degree. I'm an entomologist at the University of Arizona, and I work in cooperative extension. But I have a lot of autonomy, in my position and what I do. A lot of deadlines, though, as well. So, it can be a lot to manage. I work with our integrated pest management program. So we help people in agriculture and community health and urban pest management, all different situations. I help to coordinate some of that throughout the state.
An entomologist and a poet. Let's hear some of your work, please.
I'll start with a poem that involves an insect. And this poem was one of those morning poems that I wrote. I woke up in the morning. The first thing I do is I get my coffee. And I had noticed the honey that was sitting on the counter. And I read the label there, the warning label. And that's what inspired this poem. Warning. Do not feed honey to infants under 1 year. They may give up the breast. They might sprout mandibles and gnaw the crib rail restlessly, fly from the window with a craving for wildflowers and forsake human form. And who can blame them? Distillation of floral nectar gathered in a million flights of drones, passed mouth to mouth, whole societies ordered around this purpose, to hover, to taste, to fly, pollen-laden legs dusting the air, trailing back to the hive. And isn't this how humans began? Community and kin, returning with food to nourish our young, stories round the firelight, cherished home among rivers and plains before we got the taste for nature as commerce. A memory this deep becomes a danger. Do not feed honey to your infant. They may become famished for a world long gone, waking up hungry in a place where nothing is sweet.
Oh, it's haunting, it's macabre, and it's so interesting, all from reading a food label. I love that. That's really great. Thank you.
Right.
What else inspires you?
I've really been enjoying getting closer to some of my family. I'm from a large family. I have 7 siblings. And through the pandemic, we started connecting over Zoom and been hearing a lot of these stories and stories about my dad and mom from when before I was born. I was one of the younger, of the group. I was second to the youngest. So there's a lot of stories there. So I do write a lot of poems on family topics as well.
Do you have one of those?
Sure. I've got a poem I'd love to read about my mom. This is called Secret Life. My mother knew many secrets she wouldn't tell. She carried them in soft folds around her eyes. Not even God could guess the meaning of her glance. When I was 5, I insisted I could walk to school alone, that I knew the way. I was so stubborn she relented, but followed in her car to see I got there safe. Robert Bly says that sometimes an angel's wings are too wide to fit through the door. I overheard her praying once, a whispered plea through a crack in longing. Sometimes I confuse my mother with the Virgin Mary, but I believe a part of her was wolf-wild, feverish and bright, bared teeth gleaming under a sliver of moon. When she died, even the silence missed her. That empty room, after they hauled the hospital bed away, never breathed a word about her absence, but clasped her secrets tight in curtain folds long after I'd grown.
You got a couple of image of folds, the eye folds, curtain folds. I like that. It's not sentimental. We get a good picture of your mother.
Yeah, she was ill from the time I was very young. She had breast cancer. She also had some issues with depression. So I think there's a yearning, to get to know her better than I really did growing up. And she passed away when I was 11. So it's been good to hear some of those stories and to write about another side of my mother, that I didn't really know as a child.
Yes, yeah. Do you have a favorite poet?
Well, I mentioned Robert Bly in this poem, and I'd say that he's definitely among one of my favorites and one of the most influential poets on me. I feel he's done so much for American poetry. If you go back, he started a journal of translations that was called the 60s, and he had all these poets bringing in translations from all around the world and reinvigorating American poetry. And with his own poetry, has a way of leaping from subject to subject and then kind of connecting it all together at the end. I really admire.
Have you been formally instructed in the writing of poetry?
Well, no, not really. I mean, not formally as in, an FFA, an MFA or one of those programs, though I haven't ruled it out yet. But I will say that the writing community in Phoenix is incredibly supportive, and I've been fortunate to be a part of different critique groups and communities, really, that are very encouraging. I've learned an awful lot from my peers here, sometimes in informal teaching type workshops, and also going to the conferences at ASU and things like that. So I've gotten a fair bit of education, I guess, on my own. But I think the best education is just reading.
Yeah. Do you have a really short poem?
I'll do a short poem. This one's also about my mother, and it's literally based on a photo of her holding my oldest sister, an old black and white photo. Madonna. Timeless in the dark, first stroke of sun paints buttons on her flowered dress. Her shoulders straight, twist of hair spills down. With tilted chin, her hallowed face admires new life, pooled like water in her lap. Even her bare knee glows, smooth as a river stone, rolled in the mouth of God.
Thank you. Great images. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
That was well. Thank you. Don't go away. I have time for some collective questions. So there are rules to poetry. I mean, if you've had formal instruction, and there are certain poetic devices, repetition. We heard that in Roxanne's poem with when and because, and alliteration, metaphor and simile. We've heard that in Now's poems. Howard's prose poems, really giving us history lessons in poetic form. I'm still seeing that writing crop in your poem, in the boxcar, Howard. It's terrifying. Do we have to adhere to rules and devices? Is that what makes our poem? I'm thinking, in my poetry workshop class, there was a line from poet Tony Hoagland that said, write your poem accordingly, but don't forget to get out of control. And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts about that.
I can go just because, honestly...
It's Roxanne.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Roxanne. I in some ways, I have less confidence in my poetry than other genres I write in, just because I'll be honest, I don't know a lot of the rules, and so therefore I break them. And I guess sometimes I will play around with a different form to see if, it inspires anything creative but I usually don't, and I'm not, and I guess I just, my whole writing life in academics was so filled with often silent rules, but you kind of knew what they were, and I just wanted the freedom, and so a lot of my work doesn't really follow many rules. So I like that quote from Tony Hoagland, and honestly, I don't follow many rules. I think good writing is good writing, and writing that comes from, words are what I love, and I love their mystery, and I love their uncontrollability, and I love, in a way, their unreliability. And so they're just that's what draws me to all forms of writing, and that's kind of what I even like, the struggle of trying to find the word, that's always slipping away from you. I think I said to Al one time, the problem with writing is words, So I'm just being really honest. I don't follow a lot of rules, and that doesn't mean I think rules are not a good idea for especially younger poets to learn. That's just me.
Roxanne, maybe that's why we have photographers and artists, painters. They don't need the words.
Well, yeah, I know that. Yeah. But I'm guessing they probably have similar struggles, with whatever their medium is.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is Alfred. I would say that most often I'm writing in free verse and letting the poem as it emerges kind of decide what it wants to be, and sometimes it will want to take the form of a sonnet or a ghazal or something, but usually I'd say more often it's more of a free verse that comes out. But the other side of it is, I think form can be really useful once in a while to specifically write to form, because when you do that, in sticking to the form for the most part, you might make a different move than you would otherwise. And so sometimes that can lead to a sense of discovery. And so sometimes I think it's a good practice with poetry to try writing in forms.
So we've talked a little bit about society. Is spoken word, getting out there and even really expressing, being dramatic, maybe irreverent in a public place, is that important? Do we need that? Should we encourage young people to seek that out and create that kind of an artist within themselves?
Absolutely. There's a lot of good venues for slam poetry and open mic poetry in the Phoenix metro area, and it's just a vibrant community right now.
I agree. I think I don't do slam poetry, but I think people, slam poetry that I've seen, it seems, people who have that talent for, bringing performance to their poetry, if that's the way their creativity works best, I think that's great. I love to watch it. I think in the poetry world there's room for so much, and that definitely is very popular now. And I think especially my impression is amongst younger people. So I think it's great.
This is the Electric Picnic you've been listening to, and I'm Sue Taylor again on KNSJ 89.1 in San Diego. We've had a panel of fine poets today from Arizona: Howard Gershkowitz, Roxanne Doty, Alfred Fournier, and Frank Iosue. And that's all for this week. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Electric Picnic, the San Diego radio show dedicated to poetry, spoken word, and prose, with host Sue Taylor on KNSJ-FM.